My son built this entire platform, my father told the investors, smiling while my brother nodded beside him. Cameras flashed. I just sat there, hands locked under the table. No, that's not where this story begins. It began 5 years earlier in a small Kansas City apartment, lit by the glow of my monitor, the room smelling like burnt coffee and deadlines. A single hard drive sat beside me, every line of code, every patent, every late-night fix with my name on it. That drive was supposed to secure my future, but that night it became proof of what I'd lost. And that folder would expose every lie they built. I used to think building something with my family would be the safest bet. You grow up believing loyalty is the foundation, that blood means protection. Turns out, it just means they know exactly where to cut you deepest. Back then, I was 25, fresh out of grad school, a software engineer in Kansas City. I'd turned down 2 job offers from big tech firms because my father said, "Why build someone else's dream when we can build ours?" It sounded noble. I wanted to believe him. He had the connections, the money, the charisma that filled every room. I had the skill, the code, the logic, the quiet grind that kept systems running when everyone else was asleep. Our first office was a narrow floor above a laundromat. The windows rattled when the dryers spun below. I remember that smell detergent and burnt coffee and how proud I felt setting up my first server rack with my father watching. He called it Dawson Tech. He said it like a promise. 50-50 partnership, he told me. Equal share, equal credit. I didn't even ask for paperwork then. He was my dad. Paper felt unnecessary. My mother would visit with homemade sandwiches, fussing over how pale I looked. She'd hum as she set them down, always checking if I'd eaten. Ethan would show up sometimes after work, sleeves rolled up, phone buzzing nonstop with his clients. He was charming, effortless, the kind of guy who called waiters by name and remembered birthdays. My father loved that about him, said he had leadership energy. I had the quiet kind, the kind people didn't notice until something broke. In those early months, everything ran on hope and caffeine. I'd pull all-nighters debugging authentication issues, half the time coding with one hand and holding a slice of cold pizza with the other. My father would pop in at midnight, pat my shoulder and say, "You're a machine, Claire." I'd smile even when my wrists ached. That praise meant more than any paycheck. But even then, small things started to slip. When reporters came for interviews, he'd say, "We built this system together." When investors toured the office, he'd pull Ethan into the photos, the family faces of innovation. I was always behind the screen, literally. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was the work. I thought the results would speak for themselves. Our Sunday dinners became status updates. My father would talk about expansion acquisitions, funding rounds. Ethan would talk about client conversions. When I tried to explain our new back-end framework, my mother would glance at her watch and say, "Let's not talk about computers during dinner." My father would laugh and pour more wine. "She's always in her own world," he'd say. Everyone would laugh, and I'd laugh too, pretending it didn't sting. Still, I stayed late, pushed harder, built cleaner systems. I told myself I was laying bricks for a future that would finally prove my worth, not as his daughter, but as his equal. Every line of code was proof. Every patent draft, every architecture diagram I saved, copies under my name. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I was thorough. That's what engineers do. We prepare for failure before it happens. The day we moved into the new downtown office, he gave a speech. From a tiny room above a laundromat to this, he said, arms wide, the city skyline glowing behind him. "We're a family business, built on trust." Everyone clapped. I stood in the back, smiling, exhausted, believing every word. Looking back, that's where the first cracks appeared. Hairline fractures, no one noticed. My father started introducing Ethan as the face of Dawson Tech. I became our lead developer. The title shift was small, almost invisible, but it carried weight. I kept telling myself it was fine. Titles don't build systems, people do. I had my coffee, my code, my drive. I thought loyalty would protect me. But loyalty without recognition is just silence. And silence has a way of turning into erasure. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was already rewriting my story. It didn't happen all at once. Favoritism, rarely does it, creeps in, quietly disguised as strategy, practicality, optics. My father started taking Ethan to meetings I used to lead. Investors respond better to him, he said once, adjusting his cufflinks. He's got that easy charm you can't teach. I wanted to argue that charm doesn't write code or debug a system at 3 a.m., but I just nodded. Soon emails about partnerships stopped including my name. Announcements in the company newsletter started reading project led by Ethan Dawson. The first time I saw it, my stomach dropped. I told myself it was a typo. The second time, I knew better. At home, my mother talked about how proud she was of the boys. She didn't mean it cruelly, but every word landed like gravel in my chest. Your father and Ethan are such a team, she said one Sunday dinner, passing the potatoes. It's wonderful to see them working side by side. I looked at my hands, fingers still lined with the faint red marks from the keyboard. Yeah, I said, wonderful. Ethan thrived in the attention. He was good at making himself seem indispensable, staying late just long enough to be seen asking me casual questions about projects, then quoting my answers in meetings as his own insight. Once I caught him using a slide deck I'd designed from scratch. My initials were still in the footer. I watched him present it to a client while my father nodded proudly beside him. Not once did either of them look my way. Afterward, I confronted my father in the hallway. Dad, that was my work. He sighed as if I were a child who didn't understand the world. Clear perception matters. People invest in leadership, not labor. Ethan represents the vision. You're the backbone, and every company needs one. You should be proud. Backbones don't get introduced, I said quietly. He frowned. You're emotional. Don't be emotional about business. That line, don't be emotional. It stuck to me. Like a rule I wasn't allowed to break. The shift at work became impossible to ignore. Ethan got a corner office with glass walls. My cubicle stayed the same next to the hum of the server room where no one ever visited. When investors toured, my father made sure Ethan led the walkthroughs. He's the future, he'd tell them. The words slid off his tongue easily like they'd been practiced. The staff followed his lead. People who once came to me with technical questions now waited for Ethan's approval. He said we should delay the rollout, one of the developers told me. Did you agree? I didn't. But arguing would only make me look difficult. That's how women in tech disappear, not because they fail, but because they're labeled inconvenient. There was a day late fall, I remember, when my father handed Ethan a company credit card during a team lunch. Use it for business dinners, travel, whatever you need. He didn't look at me once. I was sitting right there, still paying my own expenses out of pocket. The waitress brought the check to him, assuming he was the boss. He didn't correct her. I drove home that night with my headlights reflecting off wet pavement, the city glowing gold and cruel. I told myself it was fine, that maybe this was temporary, that my work would speak louder eventually. But deep down, I knew. I was building something solid while they built a story, and in business, the story always sells first. Still, I stayed. I kept working, coding, documenting. Because part of me believed that if I just held on long enough, the truth would find its way out. But truth doesn't just appear. It has to be dragged into the light. The final crack came on a Thursday morning, ordinary enough to hide a betrayal that would split everything open. I got an email from a restaurant downtown confirming the cancellation of my seat for that night's investor dinner. Miss Dawson, it said your reservation was removed by your office. My office. I hadn't touched it. I walked straight into my father's office. He was on the phone laughing his suit jacket off Ethan sitting across from him, scrolling through his laptop like he owned the place. Why wasn't I invited tonight? I asked. He covered the receiver with his hand, looked up and smiled politely the way he did with employees. It's a casual event, Claire, more of a social thing. You wouldn't enjoy it. Social thing, I repeated. For investors. He waved a hand. You're more of the technical type. Let Ethan handle the people side. Ethan didn't even look guilty. It's not personal, he said. They just want to meet the faces of the company. The faces. As if my code, my architecture, my patents were faceless. That night, I drove past the restaurant anyway. Through the glass, I saw them, my father in his Navy suit, Ethan beside him laughing with the investors I'd spent years emailing, solving problems for saving projects that would have collapsed without me. They toasted with wine while I sat in my car across the street engine running the reflection of their smiles, flickering across my windshield. I should have gone home. Instead, I drove to my parents' house. The porch light was still on. My mother opened the door, surprised. "Dinner's in the oven," she said. "Your father just called." "They're celebrating the partnership." "Partnership?" I asked. She nodded, proud. $50 million. Ethan will be CEO when your father steps down. Isn't that wonderful? For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I walked into the dining room. The table was already set for Sunday plates, candles, the usual ritual. My childhood photos still hung on the walls, me at science fairs, me holding my first laptop, proof that I'd been there from the start, proof no one cared to remember. I sat down in my old chair. My mother poured tea. "I know this is hard for you," she said gently, "but your father's just being practical. You'll still have a role." "A role," I repeated, "like an employee." She hesitated. "He said you'd get a generous severance if you decide to move on." The sound that left my throat wasn't a laugh, but it wasn't quiet either. She flinched. "Claire, don't make this about pride." But it was never about pride. It was about existence, about being written out of my own story while everyone smiled and called it business. I stood up. The chair legs scraped the floor. My mother tried to touch my arm. "He loves you, you know." I looked around the house, every photo, every trophy, every trace of my years then at her soft, uncertain eyes. If that's love, I don't need it. I left before she could answer. Back at the office, the lights were off. The city outside the glass walls shimmered cold and metallic. My desk looked smaller than ever. I turned on my monitor and opened the corporate restructuring document that had been left on my keyboard earlier that day. I hadn't read it yet. There it was, Ethan Dawson, co-founder and CTO, Claire Dawson, senior developer. 3 words erased, 5 years. Something inside me went still, not angry, not broken, just still, like water before a storm. That moment flipped a switch in me. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't call anyone. I just opened a new folder on my desktop and started saving every file, every log, every patent under a single name. Mine. I didn't go back to the office for 2 days. No calls, no emails, nothing, just quiet. The kind that presses against your ribs until you either scream or change. I chose the second. The third night, I turned my apartment into a war room. Laptop screens glowed across the kitchen table, folders spread like battle maps, contracts, patent filings, contribution logs. Every receipt of who had truly built Dawson Tech. 5 years of data dates code commits timestamps, my proof, my protection. I called one person, Megan Liu. We'd met at a conference years ago, bonding over coffee and burnout. She answered on the second ring. "I was waiting for this call," she said. "I think they're selling the company without me," I told her. "You know they are," she replied. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" We met the next morning at a small cafe near Union Station. She wore a gray blazer tablet in hand, eyes sharp. I slid the flash drive across the table. "Everything's here." She plugged it in, scrolling. "Claire, you have them cornered. The patents list you as sole inventor. The partnership contract says equal ownership. If they move forward with that sale, they're violating federal IP law." The words didn't sound real, so I can stop it. "You can block the sale, force a buyout, or expose them publicly. Your choice." I stared at the steam rising from my coffee. My reflection wavered inside it, tired but clear. "Then we'll stop it," I said. Over the next week, we built our case the same way I built software, systematically, one line at a time. Megan drafted a cease and desist letter, attached exhibits of proof. I organized every file like I was debugging the story they'd tried to overwrite. Every bug led back to them. Every fix led back to me. Meanwhile, my father's confidence grew louder. He held meetings, laughed in hallways, spoke of closing day like it was already history. Ethan strutted around like a CEO in training new watch, glinting under fluorescent light. No one looked at me anymore, which suited me perfectly. I'd mastered invisibility. People don't notice the person collecting evidence. I worked late every night. Sometimes I'd pause hearing the city hum outside my window. For the first time, the noise didn't make me anxious. It steadied me. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was planning. Megan called the night before the investor presentation. "Tomorrow's your moment. You ready?" I looked at my screen rows of folders labeled by year project patent. "I've been ready for 5 years," I said. The next morning, I arrived at the conference early. The lobby smelled like polished marble and nerves. My father stood near the podium rehearsing. Ethan checked his tie in the reflection of a glass wall. They didn't notice me sit in the back row with Megan. When the presentation began, it was like déjà vu. My diagrams, my architecture, my words, all spoken through Ethan's mouth. Investors nodded impressed, until one woman asked, "Can you explain the encryption layer?" Ethan blinked. "It's optimized for efficiency." She frowned. "How exactly?" he faltered. My father jumped in, changing the topic. Megan leaned toward me. Now she whispered. I stood up. My voice didn't shake. "I can explain that," I said. Heads turned. My father froze. "Since I'm the one who designed it." The room went silent. Megan handed out copies of the legal letter as I connected my laptop to the projector. The screen filled with facts. Code commits 47,000 lines by Claire Dawson, 0 by Ethan. Patent filing 7, all under my name. The original partnership contract highlighted in yellow equal credit and ownership. The investors' expressions shifted from confusion to fury. One closed his laptop, another whispered to an aide. My father's voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," I said, calm. "It's documentation." By the end of the day, the sale collapsed. IP ownership concerns, legal exposure, investors withdrew. 2 weeks later, Megan negotiated my buyout $20 million for full rights to the code. I signed the papers with steady hands. My father didn't show. Ethan didn't call. 6 months passed. I started my own company, smaller, smarter mine, alone. 2 of the same investors reached out offering funding. They said they'd never seen someone defend their work with such precision. I smiled. Precision was always my language. I named the company True North Systems. The first product I launched bore only one signature, my own. And when I saw the first payment hit my account, I didn't celebrate. I just sat in the quiet, feeling the peace of something finally done right. The message came late one night, just a single line from my father. "We should talk as a family." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an invitation back to the same table where I'd been erased. I deleted it without replying. A week later, Ethan sent a text. Didn't think it'd go this far. That one I left unread. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. The world kept turning. Dawson Tech stumbled without its backbone. The headlines shifted from praise to confusion. Ownership dispute freezes $50 million deal. I didn't smile when I read it, but I didn't look away either. Actions have echoes, and this one finally reached them. My new office was small, but bright sunlight spilling across the polished floors each morning. A mug of cold coffee sat beside my keyboard the same way it always had, but now the code, the patents, the vision were all mine. I'd traded legacy for truth, and it was worth it. Sometimes I walk by the old Dawson Tech building. The sign still bears our last name, but the lights inside are dimmer now. Once I saw my father through the glass-pacing phone pressed to his ear. For a moment, I almost went in. Then I remembered the silence that used to greet me there, and I kept walking. There's a certain peace in being forgotten by people who only remembered you when it benefited them. My name is finally where it belongs, on the work, not the walls. They thought erasing me would end the story. Instead, it gave me a blank page. If you've ever built something only to watch someone else claim it, this story is for you. Tell me, have you ever had to fight for credit or choose peace instead? Drop your story in the comments, subscribe for more true family betrayals, and help others find their voice too. The room shimmered with gold light and polished silver. Someone's laugh cracked through the air, too bright, too sharp. I watched a thick envelope slide across the table, my sister's hand trembling as she opened it. Gasps, then applause. The words Lake House and 350,000 floated like confetti. My glass stayed untouched. Then another envelope, thin, plain, was placed in front of me. Every sound disappeared. Eyes turned. "Go on," someone said softly. I opened it. Paper rustled once. Whatever was written inside made her smile freeze before I even finished the first line. I was 9 the first time I understood how the air in our house worked. Praise moved in one direction. It floated toward my sister, warm and endless, while the rest of us breathed what was left. She came home with perfect grades, trophies, certificates. I came home with drawings on lined paper. Mom smiled at mine, then set them aside so she could frame hers. Dad said I was steady, the kind of word people used when they had nothing better. At family dinners, my sister's stories filled the table. Mine ended before they began. I learned to cut my food quietly to wait for a pause that never came. When she got into college, we celebrated for days. When I passed my nursing exam, Mom said, "That's nice, honey," without looking up from her phone. It wasn't cruelty, it was muscle memory. Everyone had their part. Mine was to notice the silence. Holidays followed the same choreography, her entrance, everyone rising the room, orbiting her brightness. She once said I was so calm, it's like you're not even here. I laughed because that's what was expected. In photos, I stood just off center, half in shadow, half invisible. The pattern deepened with time. When her engagement was announced, I helped pick the dress, the flowers, the playlist. When mine was, she cried in the bathroom. Mom followed door, closing behind them. I remember staring at the gravy cooling on my plate, the sound of muffled sobs, the whisper of comfort that wasn't for me, later Mom's hand on my shoulder. "Let's keep the wedding small, sweetheart, just to keep things peaceful." Peaceful. That word had weight. It meant quiet. It meant don't upset her. After that, I stopped trying to fit noise into spaces already claimed. I worked, saved, built my own routine. Breathing counted. Folding laundry counted, silence counted. When people asked about family, I said we were close. It was easier than explaining the distance measured in tone, not miles. The last time I visited before that Christmas, I brought homemade cookies from the hospital kitchen. Charlotte said she couldn't eat sugar that week, some cleanse. Mom took them anyway and set them next to the untouched fruitcake Charlotte liked. I remember thinking the table looked like a museum of things she might want later. That night, lying in my studio above the Chinese restaurant, I heard the clatter of pans, the hiss of oil below. I counted my breaths until the ceiling stopped shaking. The smell of sesame and detergent mixed in the air. That was when I realized the truth. My silence wasn't patience. It was training. Every skipped word, every unfinished sentence had been rehearsal for something larger. I just didn't know yet what I'd need it for. By the next winter, the pattern had turned into choreography. Every visit home began the same way, her laughter filling the hallway before she even stepped inside. Mom's perfume already on her coat, Dad rushing to open wine. My arrival was quieter. A coat hung by the door, a hello that disappeared into conversation already happening. Charlotte talked about her campaigns, her clients, her new office. Dad called her our superstar. When I mentioned a patient who'd recovered after a long coma, Mom smiled politely and reached for the salt. I learned to measure affection in eye contact. 3 seconds was a miracle. 5 meant someone had remembered I existed. When she and Ethan announced they were trying for a baby, the house became a shrine to hope. Ultrasound magnets, fertility calendars on the fridge, scented candles that claimed to balance energy. Every conversation circled the same theme: patience, prayer, waiting. I was careful with my words, afraid even a hint of joy might sound like gloating. But the months turned into years, and the waiting became bitterness. She started skipping gatherings, claiming she couldn't stand to see normal families. Mom would defend her. She's just sensitive. I would nod, knowing sensitive was the family's way of saying dangerous. When James and I got engaged, Charlotte cried again. Not soft tears, sobbing, trembling, leaving the table mid-meal. Mom and Dad followed, leaving me and James with cold plates and the hum of the refrigerator. "It's fine," I whispered, even though it wasn't. We planned a small wedding just like they wanted. Charlotte was my maid of honor, a title she wore like a burden. She showed up an hour late to the bachelorette dinner, left after one drink, and gave a toast at the reception that began with, "It's been such a hard year for me." People clapped. I smiled for photos, eyes dry, fingers pressed into my bouquet until the stems bruised. After the wedding, the imbalance deepened. Charlotte started making small comments. "You've always had it easier, Piper. You wouldn't understand." Easier. The word stuck to me like static. I wanted to tell her about the double shifts, the missed meals, the quiet tears after long nights at the hospital, but what was the point? Any truth that didn't center her became noise. When I finally got pregnant 7 months later, I kept it secret for a while. I knew what would happen. And when I did tell them, it played out exactly as I'd feared. Charlotte's face drained of color, then flushed red. She accused me of cruelty, of timing it to hurt her. Mom sat frozen. Dad stared at his plate. I stood there holding the ultrasound photo, realizing my family could watch me be humiliated and still call it keeping peace. A week later, I miscarried. The house stayed silent. No flowers, no call from my sister. When Mom finally reached out, she repeated Charlotte's words as if they were scripture. Maybe it was the universe's lesson not to take things for granted. I stopped answering her texts after that, not out of anger, but clarity. The message was simple. My pain didn't count unless it made someone else feel better. That was the moment something in me went still. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the kind of silence you keep before a storm. By the next spring, we spoke only through group texts. My parents sent cheerful reminders about Sunday dinners, attaching photos of the table as if proof of harmony could fix what was broken. I replied with polite excuses, night shift, early rounds, chart backlog. Half were true. Most were self-preservation. When we did show up, the air felt managed. Mom planned menus that avoided triggers. No talk of babies, no stories about work, no jokes that might make Charlotte uncomfortable. James would squeeze my hand under the table, our secret Morse code for hold still. We lasted through birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, each gathering quieter than the last. Then Easter came. My aunt mentioned her daughter's engagement, and I watched it happen, the small shift in Charlotte's face, the tight smile, the silence spreading like spilled wine. 10 minutes later, she was gone, crying in the bathroom, the same script as always. The room rearranged itself around her absence. My aunt looked embarrassed, her daughter's engagement gone erased. I caught James's eye. He didn't speak until we were in the car. "This is insane," he said. "One person decides when everyone's allowed to be happy." I didn't argue. I was too tired. Somewhere along the way, exhaustion had replaced anger. I just wanted distance enough space to hear myself think. So we began to disappear, one skipped dinner, then another. Mom noticed. "It feels like you're punishing us," she said over the phone. I wanted to tell her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just done playing a role in a play that never changed acts. By December, our absences had become an event in themselves. Mom called 3 days before Christmas Eve, her voice tremoring with hope. "Please come this year. It would mean so much to your sister." My first instinct was no. Then James said quietly, "Maybe it's time to stop running from the noise." I didn't know if he meant confrontation or closure. Maybe both. So we went. The house glittered when we arrived, garland candles, the smell of roast and cinnamon. Charlotte greeted us with a smile too bright to be real. For the first hour, everything seemed rehearsed. She asked about my job. I asked about her latest project. Mom kept refilling glasses. Dad laughed louder than usual. Dinner came and went, and then Dad stood clearing his throat. "We have something special for you two this year." Mom disappeared into the kitchen and came back with a large envelope. She handed it to Charlotte. The room leaned forward as she opened it. Gasps applause, the word Lake House. Charlotte cried beautiful tears that caught the candlelight. "It's the cabin," she whispered. "They bought us the cabin." I felt James's hand find mine under the table. I smiled because that's what you do when history repeats. Then Dad said, "And we have something for you too, Piper." Mom reached under the tree and pulled out a smaller envelope, thin plain white. She placed it in front of me with the same smile people give children before a trick. "Go ahead," she said. The room quieted. My pulse matched the clock on the wall. I opened it. Inside, a folded letter written in my mother's looping handwriting. "Read it aloud," Dad said. "We want everyone to hear." I looked up, unsure if this was another setup or something else entirely. Charlotte's smile held steady, confident, radiant. I took a breath, flattened the paper, and began to read. "Dear Piper and James," I began. My voice trembled once, then steadied. "We've watched you work hard for everything you have, and we're proud of the adults you've become." The room stayed still. Charlotte's smile faltered just slightly. I kept reading. "Piper, your dedication to your patients, your strength through difficult times, and the grace you've shown even when others failed to show you the same have reminded us what real character looks like." Mom's eyes glistened, but it wasn't sadness. It was recognition, the kind that comes too late. "James," I continued, "you've stood by her quietly, steadily through years of imbalance that we now realize we allowed to grow unchecked." The silence shifted heavier now. Charlotte's hand froze halfway to her glass. I read the next line slower. "We know you've been saving to buy your first home, and we want to give you what we should have years ago." My throat tightened. I could feel Charlotte watching me. "We're giving you $45,000 toward your first house," I said, "and covering the remainder of your student loans." The air cracked. Charlotte's face turned the color of ash. Ethan looked down at his plate. James exhaled softly beside me, a sound that was half relief, half disbelief. "This is not a loan," I read. "It's not charity. It's acknowledgement for the times you were treated unfairly and stayed silent to keep the peace." Charlotte's fork slipped and clattered against her plate. The sound felt like punctuation. I kept my eyes on the letter. "We're tired of pretending this dynamic is normal. We love both our daughters, but we can't keep enabling behavior that hurts one to soothe the other." When I looked up, Charlotte was staring at me, her expression raw anger, shame, disbelief tangled together. "You planned this," she said finally, her voice low but trembling. "I didn't," I said, folding the letter once. "They did." "This is humiliating," she snapped, standing up. "You made me look like the villain in front of everyone." Dad's tone was calm, almost clinical. "No one made you anything. We wrote down the truth." Charlotte turned to me. "You must be proud of yourself. You finally got your revenge." I set the letter down. "If that's what this feels like, maybe that says more about you than me." James stood, voice even but firm. "For years you've treated her like her existence was a threat. That ends tonight." Charlotte's lip quivered. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly," he said. "And so does everyone else now." Ethan spoke next, soft but steady. "Charlotte, enough." Her shoulders dropped. For the first time, she looked small, like someone who'd run out of scripts. Mom's voice broke the silence. "We love you, honey, but this family can't keep orbiting one person's feelings." Charlotte pressed her palms to her eyes. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. Dad leaned forward. "Then start by listening." The only sound was the fire crackling behind us. I reached for the letter, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table between us. "This isn't about punishment," I said quietly. "It's about balance." For a moment, no one moved. Then Charlotte sank back into her chair, eyes wet but no longer defiant. The fire popped once, releasing a spark that drifted upward and vanished. Outside, snow began to fall against the window, soft, steady, soundless. No one spoke again. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't belong to her. It belonged to me. The days after Christmas passed like slow breath. The letter stayed on my nightstand, folded once edges soft from my fingers. I didn't reread it, but I didn't put it away either. It wasn't just paper, it was proof that the silence had finally spoken. Charlotte called a week later. Her voice was thin, unfamiliar. She said she was starting therapy, that Ethan was helping her find someone local. There was no grand apology, no script, just quiet. I told her I hoped it helped, and I meant it. By spring, James and I closed on a small house on the edge of town, white siding, narrow porch, 2 rooms that smelled faintly of paint and promise. The day we got the keys, I stood in the empty living room, hearing the echo of my own footsteps. For once, no one else's voice filled the space. Mom and Dad visited a few weeks later. They brought a potted fern and left before sunset. There were no speeches, no long looks, only a warmth that didn't need explanation. That night, I found the letter again, tucked it into a drawer, and watched the light fade through the curtains. Somewhere far away, I imagined the lake house, too. The water still untouched, holding its own reflection. Maybe one day we'd meet there again in some quieter version of family. For now, the world had gone still enough for me to hear the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythm of my own breathing, the smallest sounds of a life that finally belonged to me. Some people think revenge means winning louder. It doesn't. Sometimes it's the sound of a page folding a breath, slowing a door closing softly behind you. That night, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just read the truth and let it land where it needed to. Peace doesn't arrive with applause, it settles like snow covering what's been said, softening the ground so you can finally walk forward. If you've ever been told to stay quiet to keep the peace, remember this: silence can build walls, but it can also build strength. Thanks for watching my story. Tell me in the comments what moment finally made you stop apologizing for being the calm one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where justice isn't loud, but it lasts.